don't think I've asked, or maybe I already have asked the San Francisco background just because the bridge is pretty, or
I'm going to San Francisco. That's where I'm going the first week in August. I've never been before. Also, I haven't figured out I think I might have lost my very nice Zoom background in the transition between jobs. And so I have to go back and make my custom Zoom background. But I picked this from the preset Zooms since I will be going to San Francisco soon.
I lived in San Francisco for 6 years,
Yeah, it,
long time
I'm
ago.
very excited. My husband and I are going alone without the children.
Nice. Well played.
We have a very involved Mimi and Grammy in town who do wonderful things for us, and they will be watching the kids. And yeah, we're only staying a few days, but I'm excited. We're gonna do a day tour out to Yosemite, and we're gonna go to Muir Woods, and we're gonna go see like the. It's not called the Science Center. It's called the Academy. Was it the Academy of Sciences or something like that? So do
The
some of these things. Do a boat cruise, all
My
that good
wife used to
stuff.
work at the California Academy of Sciences as a docent.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's so cool. My husband and I, like, this is our thing. Everywhere we go, we want to go see the science museum. So that's cool. What did she do there?
She was a docent for marine biology. She took a marine biology class there and was a docent.
That's so cool. I love
Hey,
that.
hey, we have an attendee coming in. Hey, Leanne. Welcome to the webinar. Turns out this topic is not terribly exciting to people, so far you are the only person to show up to the webinar, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if you're interested in making this more of an informal conversation, just throw out and chat and let us know if you want to come on voice or on video, and you're welcome to do so. Um, Otherwise, you can chill and we will have our conversation around some of this remediation and personalization stuff that we've been playing with the AI world. So your call, either way. But Alex and I were just chatting, waiting to see if anyone would show up. All right. Well, maybe let's get. Let's see. I think you're right, Leanne. People um, are not ready for this conversation. So, would you like to come on voice and have this conversation as we're going through? Because it is very exploratory, it is very nascent, and we can also talk about what we found from some of our instructors in terms of how they're like not ready for this as well as we're going through. Anyway, I will click the allow for you to talk button, and then it's your call if you speak or not. So yeah, so the premise of this, the thing that Alex and I are going to talk about and have been talking about briefly, I guess maybe first introductions. My name's Marcus. I am in charge of the EdTech company Harmonize. We do discussion tools for instructors. And one of the things we've been exploring with AI is how do we help instructors build better initial activities? How do we get them to build an activity that students can participate in? How do we use AI to do that so they can sort of couple their subject matter expertise with the power of the learning of LLMs now to be able to actually build a better activity for them to participate with their students? Alex has just joined the company. This is her second day. So I'm like, you want to come join in this webinar? So she's an instructional designer with a lot of background in learning science and such as well. So Alex, anything else we should add to your introduction?
Yeah, I come at this from the perspective of having helped instructors who, for the most part, were not very excited about AI, who maybe were really concerned more about the plagiarism issue. But I've also worked with some instructors who were really excited about how AI could help them and make life better and easier and help them do more with less. And so this is a really interesting topic to me. And I'm excited to discuss it with you.
Yeah, and so let's talk about how we got here, and so you can also get a feel for this your initial comment, which is very true, which is people are not quite ready for this, I believe, yet. So let me give you a little bit of context. I'm going to share my screen and talk about how we got here and where we're planning on where we were planning on going and what that looks like. So 5 seconds on Harmonize. Harmonize is a discussion tool, plugs into your LMS that allows students to participate in all kinds of multimedia ways. Been around for many years, and what we found when we looked at what instructors were using the tools is that they did not really know how to build, or well, some of them, I should say, did not know how to build a really compelling set of instructions for their students. So like if I am actually asking students to do something, what does that look like? And how do I build on that? And so our first step into the AI realm was, can we help the instructors build prompts? And so here I am doing a quick edit of things. And so the first feature we released to instructors was, okay, let's take ChatGPT. You tell us your subject matter expertise. If you know about Bloom's taxonomy, you tell us what Bloom's taxonomy you think your students are at, or we'll call it a complexity level. Give us some learning objectives, and we will build an activity for instructors. They were ready for this. This people are starting to use. They're really building better prompts. The whole goal was for them to be able to use textbook strategies to be able to see what an activity could look like at the different Bloom's level. And so, they can go back and forth. They could start over and change the Bloom's level. The goal was like, hey, instructors, just get some examples and look at them and see what seems right for your students. Because if I asked an instructor in any of our trainings and such, what Bloom's taxonomy level are your students at? There's going to be kind of a blank stare, where like some of them who've had K-12 education are going to be able to pick that out, and those that have not had a formal education background. I don't know, Alex, if this is true for you and your work with instructors. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right, depending on what their background is, or if they're more of a teaching professor versus a professor more focused on research. I think more people are getting Bloom's taxonomy savvy, though.
Okay, yeah. So this was our goal, was like, how do we, for those that don't have the savviness, or frankly just don't have the time, how do we get them to be able to create a prompt that they can then add to their topic instructions and be able to edit? So that's where we started. Um, the ideas that started to come from this is like, well, if we wanted to do remediation, let's say the students come into this activity and they don't do well in it, or some of them don't do well in it. Traditionally, how would we help those students out? How would we build an activity that can help bolster up the students who were not participating at the same level as the others, or how do we give them additional activities? And the struggle has always been like, well, from once again coming back to the instructor that doesn't have a lot of teaching background, how do we actually allow them to see examples sort of marching up and down the Bloom's taxonomy level? Maybe you went too quickly to the apply level for Bloom's taxonomy. Your students were still more at the understanding facts or basic level of dealing with the information. How do we kind of allow you to go forward and come back up and down that realm? Or how do we allow you to build a personalized learning reflection for the students to come back and think about what they were doing and maybe try to get a little more insight there? Those were the two ideas that popped into my head, and I was just speaking. I mean, Alex started yesterday, so I just started speaking with Alex about this yesterday. And I don't know, Alex, how those ideas struck you, if they made sense from an instructional design perspective, before I go into some of the nuts and bolts of what I've been playing with to make this happen.
Yeah, I thought this was such an interesting question because, or an interesting idea, because it does, like, it's fully supported by the learning science, right? This idea that you go in and you see how your students do on the discussion, and if they're not doing very well, you think, oh, maybe I need to have some remediation activities. Or if like everyone knocked it out of the park, it's like, oh, I aimed too low and I got to start dialing up to a different complexity level. But I think, and you mentioned this earlier, K through 12, I think this is the kind of thought process that's just way more typical at the K-12 level. And I also think, to the extent that this is a thought process in higher ed, it's much more a thought process in live classes. I think it's something that a lot of people just don't touch in online classes, because that idea of like, on the fly, I'm going to change things up. On the fly, I'm going to have supplementary activities. That, even though we know that that kind of responsiveness in terms of what assignments you're giving, like having those assignments respond to what the students need, is really great for learning, it's just hard in online teaching. I see we had a comment come in from Leanne. I wonder the language used in different silos. That's a good point too. When I hear remediation, I think math or K-12, rather than thinking about meeting students where they are or providing more rings on the ladder. This is such a great comment, Leanne. You're giving us like the language to use to speak with people about this, to help students reach the higher learning objectives. I'm going to take some notes, Leanne. That's great.
Yeah, so where we approach this, we're like, well, we could build in some scaffolding, right? We could build in the ability to say, in Canvas, for example, like the students aren't hitting 80%, they can't move forward on either of these activities. Can we add an extra activity that could be extra credit or could be something along those lines? We surveyed our instructors, and it could be the language we use, but we basically said personalized learning, like could we build on the fly activities that move up and down the Bloom's taxonomy level, because that's easier to do now because you can use something like our AI generator, or I'll jump over to ChatGPT and show some examples of playing around with that directly. Um, our instructors willing to do that? And the answer was uniformly like not interested, which really was really interesting. Like the DE coordinators, the distance ed coordinators, the Center for Teaching and Learning, the instructional designers were like, yeah, that actually is an exciting idea. But then when we turn around and talk to the instructors about it, they are like, yeah, not there. And Alex brought up some good points yesterday, which is like this build on the fly is often something that's frowned upon, right? Like if you're changing the assignments, um, you had tons of thoughts on that of like maybe that's not a good thing, or maybe people just are told that's not a good thing, or what have you.
Yeah, I feel like we're with a lot of the online courses, there's strong encouragement to build as much as possible, if not everything in advance, to have everything published, if not open, so that students know exactly what assignments are coming and when. And so this idea that you're going to maybe make some things up at the last minute, like like it can come across as, oh, it's going to be confusing for the students, or there could be grading challenges, right? How does that affect the points in the course? You can address some of these things, though. I think you can think about like, oh, well, maybe they always have some small formative assignment due on a certain day each week, but the contents of that assignment aren't determined yet, and that's where you can kind of work in these remediations. Or you had an idea too about sort of building them in from the beginning, I think, like a way to
Yeah,
have these alternative assignments available from the start.
yeah, like how to basically offer so the students can see the full roadmap. Like if I'm intimidated by module 3, I can see there is the primary assignment. I can see there is an assignment labeled as optional work that I could do before if I'm intimidated by it, or I could do once I dive into the main activity if I'm like, whoo, overwhelmed, back out, come back in, work on this other activity. We attach some extra credit points to it, or maybe some. I mean, the grade books aren't great in the LMSs to be able to do this sort of optional grading, but to be able to put those in place. And the thing that we always lacked to be able to do this is to know sort of the scaffolding of like, this is the activity the instructor has built. What is one step below, or what is one step above that activity level? Because that's a hard scaffolding to do, I think, for most instructors. And that's kind of where the AI playgrounds came into, where it's like, well, if we can know what the main activity is, it would be relatively straightforward, just a few clicks to be able to generate some activities that are both maybe a pre-work if you want, or a post-work if you found it too easy, or give them that student choice of like, here are 3 assignments. And I think this is the one that interests me or is challenging enough for me. Some students are obviously going to pick the easiest one because they just want to coast through and get the grade. But you could offer some of these up front, like we're just going to put 3 assignments in here, and here's the one at understand, here's the one at apply, here's the one at analyze from a Bloom's level. Although I'm not confident, and Alex, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, like, is it always a straight marching up and down the pyramid when you're thinking about the scaffolding? Or is there some other path to be able to go to when you're doing this sort of differentiation, to be able to give them those options?
Oh, that's interesting. Other ways to scaffold other than like offering like the lower levels on the ladder.
Yeah, yeah,
I do
because what's
tend to,
easy, I mean, just to reframe, what's easy for us is to say, I can generate an activity at understand, apply, analyze. Took 6 clicks, they're all there. Have at. That's easy, but I wasn't sure if that's actually the right scaffolding to do. Is it always just the 3 levels of the Bloom's taxonomy that you're closest to, or does it make sense for them to just be those 3, or is there some other path you take to help the students?
that's interesting. This probably goes off in a different direction, but I taught writing for many years, and we tended to think of scaffolding in terms of things like outlines, drafts. This is a very different kind of scaffolding, but it's more the scaffolding of the prep work. It's less about let me dial you back to a lower Bloom's level and more like I'm going to chunk this larger activity down into pieces so that you can be successful on it. And then, students are getting feedback at each space. So that's something that, and is something that I'm now immediately wondering if like AI has a place here in terms of generating those sorts of scaffolding activities. Leanne has also brought up mastery grading and pathways, which is exactly what you brought up, Marcus.
Yesterday.
And I'm really, yeah, you brought this up yesterday. I have never worked with those hardcore. I've used the things where it's like, you have to meet this threshold to move to the next assignment, or these are the requirements of the module, and you have to meet them to move on to the next module. But those mastery pathways, I think that Leanna's talking about, actually allow for the kind of thing you're thinking about, Marcus, where you can, if you don't meet a certain threshold, you actually get put down a different pathway. Right? I think that is how those work.
That my basic understanding of them, the problem we often see is that we are often working with instructors who don't have a partner instructional designer, or they're trying to build the class, or maybe they don't even want to work with an ID. And so trying to get them to do Mastery Connect is tough from a time perspective, which I think is I think is what your comment is getting to, is the time intimidation of being able to build this. It's hard enough to build a class, but to build a class that has this bifurcation of where the students are traveling as they're going through based on their performance is pretty tough to do time consuming wise. And that's, I think, from an ed tech perspective, it's like, could we actually simplify that somehow to where it's not done purely in the LMS, but it's done maybe inside of the assignment itself? Um, to be able to simplify that for instructors until such time as the LMSs are using more AI to be able to help build some of this. Because I know Blackboard is doing more of the AI course building. I haven't looked at the quality of the courses they're building. I'm a little dubious there of just handing over to AI and be like, build a course for us. Yeah, that'll be fine. Um, but Canvas isn't even there yet. They are just just dipping their toes into the AI world. Um, but where we deviated a little bit there. Let me jump over and show some of the things that that when I'm teaching instructors about this, I've been trying to get them to think about. So traditionally, I have them use the AI inside of our tools, right? Because it's just one click and they're there. But for those instructors who are truly curious about this, I can steer them to ChatGPT, and I can be like, uh, write me 3 different assignment prompts for an online discussion in higher ed. I'm going to misspell a bunch of words. Um, at different Bloom's taxonomy levels, so that they can learn a little bit of where they're trying to hit their students. So if they don't want to just adjust it in our tool, they can come out and actually see 3 different possible prompts at the different levels, so that they can help kind of determine where their students are at, to be able to do some exploration here of like what is actually appropriate for my students. Because if I can see them all laid out in front of me as an instructor, I can be like, well, that's a little too easy. That's right. Maybe this is a bit too hard. So my students are at the apply level of Bloom's, which then anchors me to this idea of like, okay, now I know where my students are at, which traditionally we haven't had. And therefore, even with just a simple prompt like this, I could have those 3 different activities. Like if I'm not using Harmonize, I can even do this just with Canvas, to be able to then coach the instructors to come back and say, okay, well, and maybe this is an optional prompt. Maybe this is an optional prompt. Some instructors are receptive to this, like the really the ones that have drunk the AI Kool-Aid, if you will, which is a very small segment of the instructors that we work with so far. They are not comfortable at this level yet. But it seems like this is a potential that we've never had before, to where we can actually quickly guide them through and help them, because the time saving brings them in to be able to work with this. And then we then anchor them into something that we know from a learning science perspective, that we now have an idea of where the students are at, or at least where most of the students are at, so that they can jump up and down. Because then you can actually just ask it to elaborate on some of these prompts. And now I have if assuming apply was the right level, I can then build 3 assignments in Canvas that have these different things built into them. When it gets to steering the students, like you're talking about the mastery pass things, we're actually using AI to coach the students, using a rubric and different things to be able to have them do iterations of learning in this regard. And I think this is where it comes interesting of like, how do we use AI to steer the students to optional resources or optional activities based on how they're doing real time. And I think this is where it gets really interesting. And this is obviously harder for the instructor to do on the fly because the real time phrase obviously just throws it right out of the water. Like, unless they're just going to hang out in a Zoom session all the time. But can we actually analyze the student work, figure out how they're doing on the assignment, and then perhaps automatically offer them some additional resources or some additional readings? Maybe it's not even an activity, maybe it's just some information they need to stop and consider. When I put this idea to our instructors, they also were like, no, because I guess if you think about, say, for example, I have a rubric, we use AI to generate rubrics. So let's say we have a 4 criteria rubric. I'm going to have to define a lower level resource for them to read and an upper level resource for them to read based on how the AI coach thinks the student is doing. So it can be like, okay, on rubric criteria 3, you were kind of weak. Here's the resource that the instructor has given that you may want to read before you take a second attempt at this, so that your second attempt is more informed by resources given from the instructor to the student. But when it came to the instructors to be able to figure out that map of, for 4 criteria level, I'd like a plus and a minus resource for each of these. Like, oh, you excelled at this, you could do extra reading here. You did okay at this, you're fine. You did poor on this rubric criteria. Let's send you off to read this resource. The answer was also a resounding too much time. And I don't know, Alex, if that jives in terms of like when you're working with an instructor and they're building the course content and they're trying to figure that out, like, do they think about it in that terms?
I think so. I think especially because you just have to think about you have limited time. Almost every instructor has, well, everyone has limits on time, right? But instructors in particular can be really time crunched. And so you have to think about how you're best spending your time. And it's not only that that takes a lot of time, it's that you're then crafting things that you're worried that only some students are going to use, or that would go to waste, in the sense of, maybe everyone chooses one thing and not the other. As you were talking, and as I was looking at what you generated here, it got me thinking about, like, in what way do these principles get used a lot, even if folks are not doing that kind of responsiveness. And this first level here of, like, the remembering level and the applying level, you can imagine the discussion post that sort of asks for both of these, first one, then the other, perhaps like at different times. Or you can imagine the class that maybe gets at the remembering level by putting a poll in with the reading and sort of tests that earlier in the week. And then the middle of the week, there's a discussion that is getting at the supply level. And then at the end of the week, there is a summative assessment, maybe like a reflection or a blog, or maybe an activity where students are like submitting something, walking through a PowerPoint. And this is at this higher level and is then more like the summative assessment. It's because of that time issue. I think it's more likely that instructors try to fit in all of these things sort of chronologically. But the downside to that is that some students don't need these lower levels, right? They're ready to hop in at the higher level, which is why we want to somehow figure out that personalized responsive piece. But it's tricky.
It is, yeah. And I guess the distrust I have in AI, founded in what we're actually trying to build, is that you can't have it do anything without keeping the instructor in the loop, right? Like, it will occasionally go rogue. And so we're constrained by this idea of 99% of the time, we could actually probably prompt the student with some quality questions that cause them to think about things at different levels, or give them some alternate activities that we could build on the fly. But I feel personally, at least right now, we are constrained by this ethical concern of, like, well, in the 1% of time when it goes sideways, we've actually caused harm versus where we're at. Because that's kind of where this trends, where the instructors are like, can you just build these for me? I'm like, well, I need you to review every single piece of it if I'm going to do this, which also gets into the time constraint side of things. But until such time as these LLMs hallucinate less, I don't think we can really, well, I don't feel we can take that risk. Maybe other tech companies feel they can take that risk and be like, sure, it'll be fine. Um, but but that's where we're going. Yeah, and I think, Leanne, your comment to TAs are correct. Like, the The TAs are helpful. They can be incorrect. What we find in talking to people is people are way more willing to accept a human mistake than they are AI overlord mistake. And it's we're not there yet as a society or as a learning community or whatever it is, I think. Because even with some of our AI coaching, the reception is very much in the niche sort of 5 to 10% people who are ready for this yet to say, yeah, I have a rubric, I've defined it, I'm willing to let you tell my students to do better on rubric criteria 3 or something like that. We're still not culturally there yet, I think, and from based on what we're surveying our instructors and talking to them about. So I guess, I mean, this is the idea that I feel like has tons of potential. And based on webinar attendance and our surveys of our instructors, like we're not ready for this yet. And I haven't figured out a way to make this palatable. Although I will say, one of our institutions, Lincoln Memorial University, develops prompt guides that they hand out to instructors to get them to do some of these things that they want them to do. Like, here, paste in this prompt, use this GPT or whatever it is, to be able to say, just type some stuff in here and then look at it and see what you think. So they're using this more for enforcement of their course template, or not enforcement, but compliance with their course template and what they want to have happen. But I think creating some of these resources can pull sort of maybe that first 5% of instructors in to be able to think about it, or 3% of instructors. And I think we're going to have to build it this way to where it's like, get the early adopters in, have them do it for a semester, have them talk about the results or take a look at the outcomes, do a formal study of the outcomes if you can get enough instructors to try it, to be able to then bring the rest of the community along to make this okay. Because right now, like, putting this idea out, like, we would get zero adoption as best I can tell. Like, we have to so baby step into it. And I don't really know what the proper baby step is. That, is it just a GPT that does this, right? To where it's like, let me show you 3 different prompts so you can think about where your students are at, and let me generate 1 extra prompt as an extra credit. Maybe that's step 1. I don't know. Alex or Leanne, if either of you have ideas of how to get into this, but it's so powerful because now we know where the students are, we know where they might be. We can even use AI to coach them and figure out where they're at on those things. But how do we have that instructor feedback and them in the loop to be able to build a much more complicated course?
Oh, we have someone
Alex.
else chiming in. Another thing to keep in mind is that our faculty are burnt out. Yeah, we just came out of the dramatic changes of COVID. They are now confronting AI. They are tired. They don't have time capacity for more change. Yeah, it's tough. And we're thinking through the ways that AI can help precisely with that problem, right? And lighten the load. But like it also just feels like one more change and one more thing to learn. And so that's the trick. But I like what you said, Marcus, about this idea of like, well, maybe it's just, the discussion is at the applying level and then the analyzing level is extra credit. Or like if you do the remembering level, you could earn 1 point back if you lost it or something like that. Like it's almost like figuring out how to, like, is there some way to integrate this with the assignment that isn't so time consuming for the instructor in terms of like setting up mastery pathways or something. But I take this point as well, that it's just a little bit tough sometimes confronting that big new change of AI.
And I scheduled this webinar before we actually ran the survey of instructors to see, is this the next thing we build for them? And the answer was a resounding no. Hence the webinar is more about like, oh, it turns out this is pushing too far. Instructors are not ready for this yet in our survey. And then, that was a survey of a couple thousand instructors, something along those lines. So it's not a definitive, every instructor is not ready for it, but this was one of the lowest voted features we could possibly build for them from an instructor perspective. The folks like ourselves, instructional designers or CTL leads or distance ed coordinators, were like, that idea is interesting. But then when you look at the Venn diagram of like what's interesting from a learning science and what instructors are willing to adopt, there is actually no crossover on this one yet to be able to work on it. And part of me thinks, like, a lot of instructors ask us to do grading with AI, and if you guys haven't explored this, the answer is do not do this. We we took a look at it, we investigated it, and if we could shoulder some of the grading burden, then we could free up time to be able to do this. But it is not correct enough. There's no way to make it correct enough, and it goes off in crazy tangents. Hence, we did a coach that was just like point the students at the rubric idea for them to work with. We do an auto grading feature, and what I'm wondering, our auto grading feature is purely participation based, and so I'm wondering if the remedial activity or the extra credit activity could be auto graded just by participating in it, type of thing, or encouraging them to do one AI scan for feedback and think about it and do a reflection or something along those lines, so that there's not additional grading work for the instructor, but there is an option for the students to jump in and do something that is in some way auto graded. Um, but it's, I don't know, it's an interesting thing of even to get them to set it up, because it is not easy to do extra credit in Canvas gradebook. At least I haven't looked so much at the other gradebooks. So see another comment come in. I wonder how folks interested in specialized content tutors trained only on course content would be more interested in this, or is it just a different way of selling it related to specialized content development? We haven't dug into train an AI tutor on a particular course, like scan the entire course, pull it all in, and make it a bit smarter about what it's willing to talk about. I haven't explored that much, so it's an interesting concept of maybe there's an AI tutor out there that can scan your entire course and have a bit of a remedial push back and forth in conversation. I'm just really hesitant on those, just because I've seen some of the some of the hallucinations that come out. I don't know if you can fully keep it on track based on the course content or not. That would be something really interesting to explore, because then it's not something the instructor has to build. It's almost like, I won't say Clippy because that dates me, but it's the AI assistant to be able to handle some of the students feel like they need some help and they can reach out that way. I don't know if you have much experience with those. I haven't explored them at all. I don't know, Alex, have you explored any of the AI tutors that are out there? They feel like they're coming in 10,000 a day in terms of everybody building AI tutors.
I knew an instructor, well, not personally, but I knew of an instructor who created sort of an AI TA, essentially, like folks are discussing in the comments to support his specific course and to help students with his specific course. I don't know how tight of a handle he had on that or how close he was checking the work, but he loved it.
It's definitely an early
Lee,
adopter instructor, yeah.
yes, definitely. Leanne or Leanne's friend, I've been seeing you coming off mute. Did you want to dive in with anything?
No, it was just, I was like, oh no, well, that's a lot of instructors back in that conversation of the survey results and everything else. And so no, I've just been typing everything, but Sarah's here too. She said hi.
Hey.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I was a little surprised at how normally when we host a webinar, we have 80, 100 people sign up. This one we had 4 sign up. And I'm like, maybe it's the language I used. That actually could be very true, like the idea of remediation and personalized learning and whatnot. I'm not sure, but it's definitely interesting, because the other things we've hosted, I'm like, oh, build a rubric, build a prompt. Those have been very well attended, and because I think they're seen as time savings. But this one, not. And I guess, there's so many factors. It could be that I hosted it in July and everyone's like, nah, I'm resting for August semester start. I'm not sure. But it's really fascinating to me, because this seems like, when you listen to the people who drink the AI Kool-Aid on LinkedIn or webinars and whatever, they're all like, personalized learning is the way it's going to go. And it does make a lot of sense. But man, trying to fit that into the culture of where we're at today, I haven't been able to ascertain what's actually doable. So, so that was sort of the thoughts we wanted to share. I don't know if you have anything else you guys had questions about, or we could deviate back into. But it really was, this is what we've started exploring, and it's an interesting concept, but I don't know how to get the adoption to happen yet. Maybe another year of AI exposure helps people get more comfortable with it, but not super sure. So any questions or any additional things you want to jump through? How about you, Alex? Any additional thoughts, or Leanne, either one? Or Sarah, since you're in the room together?
Yeah, that's where I was like, Sarah, I'm going to this thing. She's like, and so she's just sitting here with me. No, I think we've had some interesting kind of like side conversations of, oh yeah, the language that was used, how it made us feel. and thinking about where our faculty are, right? We're in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and even those that are within AI, using it heavily, doing research on it. There's so many gaps in how it helps students learn that I think there needs to be, personally, Leanne thinks there needs to be a movement forward first in proving that AI can support student learning before we dive deeper into how it can support student learning differentially, right? It's, hey, this supports critical thinking. This can help them do this, this, and this. And the literature, the scholarship of teaching and learning, the SOTL literature is just not there yet. But as you said, there's tons of different AIs coming out. There's different intelligent tutoring systems coming out. There's also all these publications. And so I wonder if it is just time, or I wonder if it's a different way that it will be articulated, right? If the different words, not using the word remediation, Sarah mentioned the word student success. If it's what is going to be that buy-in? How is culture going to change? Is it the mastery that we have to rethink? And I was telling Sarah, I was like, man, there's some camps out there that are suggesting that we should completely change grading, so that the barely passing student is what AI can give us. And so you shift the entire framework that the lowest that someone can pass with is what AI can generate, and how challenging that can be. But that's related to mastery grading and, making sure that, they get their education worth. But is it just about the grade? Is it just about, is it them mastering the material? Is it about ensuring equity gaps of students who aren't at AI level, right, are taught how to get to AI level in passing, and then being able to get beyond that. And I think there's just a lot of questions that are still unanswered, and pathways, and how this is going to continue to change and morph in the future that we just don't know.
I would also hi, this is Sarah. I would also add that, like, when we think about personalized learning, I think personalized learning is something that's really challenging to do in the current structure that we have within higher education, which is at the end of the day, you have to assign a letter grade. Mm-hmm. And people are really concerned about making sure the ways that they assign those letter grades is quote unquote fair. And when we try to have fairness and objectivity, what we do is we hold everyone to an equal standard without recognizing growth. And so we're putting all of our emphasis on grades, and our students therefore put all their emphasis on grades instead of on the actual learning that's happening. And so I think, like, what you all are working on is so cool, and I'm excited about this possibility that AI could allow for this more personalized learning opportunities for our students, because that's where the good learning is going to happen. But we don't currently have a system that supports that structure. And so I think a lot of our faculty, when they hear personalized learning, they hear more work for you. And yes, we're saying that AI could do that more work, but they're afraid of the AI. So, kind of creates this catch-22. But Lynn, how do we incentivize a student who is doing A-level work, and then we go to them and say, well, now here's optional additional things you could do. I mean, not a lot of our students are sufficiently motivated to do that because they have other, demands on their time as well. And this is where, like Leanne was saying, like, these alternative grading approaches become really, like, integral to this conversation. Like, I am having an increasingly difficult time separating so many of the other issues I see within higher education from the need to rethink the way that we approach grading students and assessing student learning. So anyways.
Yeah, and I think there's a total tangent here, but we also work in the
we both
K-12.
talk a lot.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. We work in the K-12 space a little bit. We support this Texas Center for Education Excellence, and they do a lot of work with K-12 instructors to be able to measure student growth metrics. Like, it doesn't really matter if all your students are at A level. What really matters is you received a bunch of students and you grew them from point A to point B. And then they incentivize the instructors based on that. So it's less about the instructor getting paid to teach a course. It's about the instructor being paid an incentive pay to be able to move from growth level A all the way up to, and sure, maybe the student never made it to passing, but the growth they experienced was phenomenal. And therefore, you as an instructor did an amazing job. But I don't think higher ed is ever, well, not ever. Higher ed currently is not set up to even do as much as I can see incentive pay for instructors. It's more just paid based on time spent and courses and such, which is then I think you'd have to change the way that works and offer additional pay, because they all are overworked and they all are burnt. Not all, a lot of them are burnt out. And so, if they're going to take on more work, they should get paid accordingly, in my humble opinion. And it's just, it's an interesting thing. Something else you said that jogged a thought in my head. So everything we've done to date with AI has been textbook, right? Like, this prompt generation is literally, we were like, what are the textbooks, possible instructional strategies that apply at the Bloom's level of understand, Bloom's level of comprehend. And so we're not pushing new ground, we're literally just implementing the textbooks. To say, okay, instructor, like you've told us this is where they're at. We're going to pluck a strategy out. We're going to build an activity based on that strategy and put it in a text box for you to edit. So we're really just kind of bringing the textbook into their world more quickly. That's not controversial. Then we're generating rubrics based on them, right? So it's like, okay, we all know rubrics are great from many different ways. Instructors can choose to use them or not. Can we actually do that and help take away the time of generating a rubric? Also, just a textbook thing of like, okay, yeah, there's some 4 criteria, and then let's turn that into a rubric type of thing. That's safe as well, and it's well understood and it's well researched that if we have a rubric, we're going to get less bias in grading and it's more clarity for students, all those types of things. This personalized learning, there is no science that's been done yet on it to be able to say, what does that even look like as we're going into it all? So I wonder if that's also some of the response of this is like, these ideas are well understood. We can generate a rubric, we can go and generate an activity. Those are coming from the textbook, that's fine. Personalized learning, I have no idea what that's going to do to my students. And how do I actually implement that? And I think that could be also where some of the reticence comes in, where it's unknown and people are a little risk adverse, rightfully so, when dealing with students and hoping not to harm them. So I don't know how we eventually get enough activity out there to be able to then study it and then see what it does and then see what expansion of it looks like from there. Anyway, that was my parting thoughts. Any other parting thoughts from anyone? Otherwise, we can wrap it up, give some of your time back, and then see where we go from here. Because personalized learning is not yet on our roadmap because of the instructor survey, where it's like, nope, not interested. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you both for attending. I'm glad you are interested. I wish more people were working around in this area to try to see how it can actually play out. Alex, anything from you before we take off?
No, thank you guys so much for coming. It was a small discussion, but it was great to hear your voices and your thoughts through the chat, and sort of get that CTL perspective on the issue. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, back to your day. Back to the non-AI driven world of day-to-day work. So appreciate everybody. And I think we'll probably send out the recording of this for the others that registered and didn't attend. So we'll send this along, but it might be a little later in the week. So thanks, everybody.